News of the Times. The Woman in the Water Tub. The 1915 murder of Carrie Jubb. Welcome to News of the Times. At 6 a.m. on a cold February morning in 1915, a young stable hand made a gruesome discovery in a Huddersfield yard. A woman's body, kneeling headfirst in a horse's water tub. Her skirt was torn from top to bottom, her face was bruised and bloodied, and she was already dead. The victim was Carrie Jubb, a woman of no fixed abode and a troubled past. But who killed her, and why? In this haunting case from Edwardian England, we explore the brutal final hours of a woman failed by society, abandoned by the system, and ultimately silenced. Was it jealousy, desperation, or something more sinister? Unsolved for over a century, the murder of Carrie Jubb remains a chilling and tragic case in Yorkshire's criminal history. And in today's end of episode for the particular segment, we examine a Victorian warning to women everywhere. Overstudy may lead to inflammation of the brain, artistic tendencies, and, quite possibly, death. Brace yourself for a cautionary tale in which astronomy proves more dangerous than arsenic. So, pour a cuppa, find a comfortable chair, preferably not submerged, and enjoy the episode. Just maybe avoid watching it while taking a bath. You never know who might be lurking near the water tub. Background. Carrie Jubb was born in 1883 in Dewsbury in Yorkshire, the youngest daughter in a working-class family. Her father died young, and by her teens, Carrie was working as a weaver to help support the household. At some point she married, although records are scarce, and whatever stability that brought, it was short-lived. By 1911, she was living alone and listed only as managing house duties, a census euphemism often applied to women in precarious or socially sensitive circumstances. By 1915, Carrie had no fixed address. She drifted between towns and lodgings around Huddersfield and Dewsbury, labelled in the press as a woman of ill repute, a harsh shorthand for those surviving on the margins with little support and even less sympathy. John Balford, a troubled soldier in Carrie's past. John Balford, 32, was a soldier on furlough at the time of Carrie Jubb's murder. He had once lived with Carrie in Dewsbury, and their relationship was marked by volatility and violence. It was noted in court that he had previously served time in prison for abusive conduct toward her, a damning detail that cast a long shadow over his involvement in the case. Described as short, pale and fair-haired, Balford had been seen drinking with Carrie the night before her death. Witnesses recalled quarrels and an erratic behaviour. When questioned, Balford gave contradictory accounts of all his whereabouts that night. He claimed to have returned to his lodgings at around 9:30 p.m, although others disputed this. His presence in the narrative is a stark reminder of how often abusive men were allowed to re-enter the lives of vulnerable women unchecked. William Nicholson, a familiar face with a dangerous reputation. William Nicholson was 39 years old and worked as a navvy, a manual labourer often hired for heavy digging or railway construction. At the time of Carrie Jubb's murder, he was lodging at the New Inn in Huddersfield, the same place where Carrie had been staying just days before her death. The two were known to have been in each other's company repeatedly in the lead-up to the murder. Nicholson's reputation was far from clean. Witnesses testified that he had been seen in public with Carrie, often quarrelling, and one stated that he had struck her in the face during an argument just days before she was killed. He was described as having a violent temper and had reportedly warned Carrie that he would do for her if she continued associating with other men, a chilling phrase repeated in court. By February 1915, Carrie Jubb was barely visible to the world around her, drifting from one room to another, from Dewsbury to Huddersfield, known to some, forgotten by most. She had no fixed address, no regular work other than that which she could procure on the streets, no one to sound the alarm when she didn't come home. But in the early hours of that cold Monday morning, someone did take notice, and suddenly Carrie Jubb was at the centre of everything. From the Huddersfield Daily Examiner, the 15th of February, 1915. Supposed murder in Huddersfield. Woman found in a tub of water. Injuries to the head. Man detained by the police. A supposed case of murder was brought to light in Huddersfield this morning, and the matter is still engaging the attention of the police. At 6 o'clock in the morning, a teamer found the body of a woman in a yard off Brook Street, near the wholesale market. The body was in a tub let into the ground and filled with water. Only the woman's legs protruded. The teamer at once gave information to the police, and the body was conveyed to the mortuary in Back Ramsden Street. The body was identified as that of Carrie Jubb, a single woman aged about 30 years of age. It was found that she had sustained a large scalp wound, and there were bruises on her arms, which appear to indicate that someone had gripped her with considerable force. It seems certain that the woman's death is the result of foul play, but details of the tragedy are very meagre at present. Jubb, it is stated, belongs to Dewsbury, but latterly had spent most of her time in Huddersfield. She had no fixed abode, so far as is known at present. Her last abode was in a furnished room in Swallow Street. She is a woman of ill repute, and a man with whom it is stated she had cohabited has been detained by the police. A second man, known to be on friendly terms with the dead woman, was detained for some time at the police office, but he has since been released. The facts which have come to the knowledge of the police as the result of exhaustive inquiries point to a foul murder. No one appears, however, to have heard any screams during the night, which may be accounted for by the fact that Brook Street is a particularly quiet thoroughfare, and there are no dwelling houses in the immediate vicinity of the scene of the tragedy. The scene of the tragedy. This afternoon, a representative visited the yard which belongs to Messrs. John Beaver and Sons, rug manufacturers, and it's situated between their premises and the premises of Messrs. J.H. and Sons, fish merchants. In the yard are 4 stables tenanted by different people, and a large gate gives access for the 4 horses and carts, and is fastened at night. At the side is a smaller gate, which is usually left open so that teamers may attend to their horses. The tub is just around the corner on entering the yard, and is half sunk into the ground. It is kept partially filled by water from a pipe, which projects over the edge of the tub. The yard was in such a muddy state that it was impossible to detect any signs of a struggle. Carrie Jubb was no longer just a name whispered in public houses or dismissed in passing by the local press. Now she was a body and a question. How she had ended up face down in a horse's water tub, with bruises down her arms and her skirt torn to shreds. The public wanted answers. The police wanted clarity, and so, as was custom, the formal wheels of justice began to turn. From the Huddersfield Daily Examiner, the 17th of February 1915, the Huddersfield tragedy, inquest of a body of a woman found in a water tub, startling evidence. The Deputy Coroner, Mr. E. W. Norris, held the inquest at the police office this afternoon, touching the death of Carrie Jubb, aged 32, a married woman said to hail from Dewsbury, whose dead body was found in a tub of water outside some stables in a yard off Brook Street on Monday morning. A man has been detained by the police on suspicion of having been concerned in the woman's death, but he was not present at the inquiry. Evidence of identification was given by the deceased's eldest sister, Margaret Ann Birch, living at 28 Back Kent Street, wife of Benjamin Mill. She said that her sister had been married, but she and her husband, Herbert Jubb, had lived apart for some years. They had lived together in Middle Road, Dewsbury. Witness last saw the deceased on the 10th of July last, at the house of another sister in Dewsbury. Police Constable James Hinchcliffe of the Borough Police said that he had known the deceased for several years. He last saw her alive on Sunday night at 9:10 p.m. when she was in the Byram Street alone. She went down St. Peter's Street, and from the place where he last saw her to the closed yard at Brook Street in which the body was found would be about 150 yards. She was going in the opposite direction. The finding of the body. Henry Redfern, 17, of Kirkmore Place, Northgate, and who is a teamer, said that he'd worked at the stables of J.H. Wood & Co., which were in the yard off Brook Street and opposite the wholesale market. On Monday morning last, he got to the yard at about 6 o'clock, and on his way to the stables he had to pass near a barrel containing water, which was let into the ground. The water was used for giving to the horses, and the barrel was a large one. There would be about 2 feet of water in the barrel at the time. He noticed something white in the barrel, but owing to the darkness he could not discern what it was. After he had fed the horses, he examined the barrel with the aid of a lamp, and saw that it was the body of a woman. The head and arms were entirely in the water, and her feet were on the ground. A half-crown, some coppers, and her hat were lying near on the ground. He ascertained that she was dead, and left the body where he found it, and he went for the police and met a policeman near the market in Victoria Lane. They returned to the yard, and they pulled the body out of the tub. The hat was lying about a yard from the woman's feet, and he left the money and the hat there. There's something particularly cruel about how Carrie's body was left. Not hidden, not hurriedly buried, but folded, face first, into the water tub, as though discarded, like a broken tool or a sack of feed, a tub meant for horses, not humans, not women. The violence of the act was one thing, but the placement, public, degrading, suggested something more, not just a desire to kill her, but to shame her, to send a message, even in death. Police Constable Talbot spoke to accompanying the last witness to the place where the body was found. She was in a kneeling position. When the sergeant arrived, he saw half a crown on the ground and a cigarette end nearby. A skirt was lying between the body and the stable. It was rolled up. Sergeant Hollas gave corroborative evidence. The water in the tub, he said, was perfectly clear, and there was no sign of blood either on the clothing of the deceased or about the yard. He picked up a garment which at first he believed to be a black apron, but it was a skirt, and he'd been torn from top to bottom. Carrie Jubb had suffered terribly, that much was clear. The medical report was clinical. But behind the sterile phrasing lay the reality of a prolonged assault. She had defensive injuries on her arms, including a broken forearm. Her face bore the marks of repeated blows, a knocked-out tooth, a split lip, and a gaping wound near the temple that exposed the bone beneath. Bruising and blood beneath the scalp pointed to a sustained blunt force trauma. Her body showed signs of having been dragged, but there was no evidence of drowning. Medical evidence. There were several bruises on the back of the right hand to the knuckles of the wrist. The most severe bruises were at the roots of the little and forefingers. There was a bruise 1 inch above the right wrist on the inner side of the arm, measuring 1.5 inches by 1 inch. All up the inner side of the arm, as far as the elbow, were small bruises, and on the outside of the elbow there was an extensive bruise. There was also an extensive and severe bruise on the upper part of the left forearm, and a bone was broken. Her upper lip was severely bruised, and a tooth was knocked out of the front, but it still remained in the mouth. There was bruising around the right eye, and the skin was broken on the upper lip. Behind the upper part of the right temple was a ragged, curved wound right down to the bone. That wound must have been caused by a blow from above and downward, and might have been caused by a blunt instrument. On removing the scalp, he found several spots of effused blood, which must have been caused by several separate blows. There was no evidence of death from drowning. The wounds on the mouth and the right eye were probably caused by blows with a fist, while the position of the broken arm indicated that she had attempted to defend herself. Death was due to shock as a result of injuries received. The injuries told their own story, one of rage, control, and deliberate cruelty. Carrie hadn't drowned. She'd been beaten, dragged, and left for dead in a place meant for horses, and somewhere in Huddersfield her killer was walking free. But the evidence was beginning to close in. Police attention turned to a familiar figure, William Nicholson. He had been seen with Carrie the night before she died, was reportedly jealous of her connection with other men, and had no clear alibi. Now, weeks later, he was no longer just a name in the margins. He was facing the charge of murder. From the Huddersfield Daily Examiner, the 12th of March, 1915. Huddersfield murder. Rope maker accused of the crime. Says he's innocent. Circumstantial evidence and motive of jealousy. There was a sequel at the Huddersfield Police Court today to the brutal murder which was the evidence. A man named William Nicholson, 22, a rope maker of Swallow Street, was charged with the murder of Carrie Jubb, a woman who had cohabitated with the accused. It will be remembered that the woman was found head downward in a tub of water in a stable yard off Brook Street, quite dead. At the verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown, and it was returned. The accused man had been in custody since the crime was discovered, and has several ties, being remanded on a charge of stealing a lady's purse containing about £6. Circumstantial evidence. Mr. Pierce, in opening the case, said the accused was charged with the murder of a woman named Carrie Jubb, whose dead body was found in a yard in Brook Street, Huddersfield, on the morning of Monday, February the 15th. The case was one in the absence of any eyewitnesses must rest entirely upon what was known as circumstantial evidence. That evidence was in many respects as good as the evidence of an eyewitness, providing it was sufficiently strong to point conclusively to some person as being guilty. There was at present in this case sufficient evidence on motive to supplement a circumstantial case if that were present, and that motive would be shown by the evidence to be that of jealousy, and certain statements having been made by the accused which pointed in that direction. Carrie and Nicholson had been living together in a single room on Upper Head Row, a temporary arrangement, like so many others in Carrie's life. Before Nicholson, she had cohabited with another man, but that thread was long severed. Nicholson, however, appeared less willing to let go. On the night of February the 14th, witnesses saw the couple drinking together at two local pubs. First the Ship Inn, then the Ring of Bells Inn. They left the second establishment at around 9 p.m. and just 10 minutes later, Carrie was seen walking alone. Living together in Upper Head Row. It appeared that the accused had been living with the woman for a month or so before the murder in one room at number 9 Upper Head Row. The woman had previously cohabitated with a man named Lambeth or Carroll, but it was clear that this man had nothing to do with the crime because his movements could be accounted for with precision. It was suggested that there was some degree of jealousy on the part of the prisoner in regard to Balford's previous relations with the unfortunate woman. Dealing next with the movements of the accused and the dead woman on the night of February 14th, Mr. Pierce said they were together at the Ship Inn in Ramsden Street at about 8 o'clock. They left at about 8:10 and were again seen together in the Ring of Bells in Northgate. They left there as far as one could reasonably make sure at about 9 o'clock. About 10 minutes afterwards, the woman was seen in the street alone. If William Nicholson was innocent, he was doing a very poor job of appearing so. He hadn't planned to return to his lodgings that night. Both he and Carrie had told the landlady they'd be staying elsewhere, yet he came back alone, late, and visibly agitated. He paced the room, he drank water obsessively, and when asked, he said only that he'd been watching Carrie. Whatever had happened in the dark alleys of Huddersfield, it had left him rattled. The woman he claimed to love was now dead, and the timeline was closing in. The next in the story was that the prisoner returned alone to his lodgings at about 10:45 p.m. He was not expected back for the reason that both he and the woman had told the landlady that they were going to stay at Thorpe's lodging house in Northgate. The landlady noticed that the accused was much upset. He was constantly getting up and walking about in a restless manner and constantly asked for and took drinks of water. He said to the landlady that he had been watching the deceased woman about. Nicholson stayed at his lodgings that night, and the next morning at about 6 o'clock, the woman's body was found in the manner which has been described. Nicholson told police that Carrie had walked away on her own, drunk and annoyed, saying she was going to sleep somewhere else. He said he hadn't followed her. When asked if she might have taken her own life, he replied simply, no, she wasn't that sort. But there were problems. His clothes bore marks he couldn't explain, his hands were shaky, and his story, already full of gaps, was beginning to shift. The accused contradictory state. Initially, he told police, I was with her last night and we afterwards went to the Ring of Bells and stayed there until about 9 o'clock. He asked where the body had been found, and when told, he replied, when we left the Ring of Bells, we went together towards the church. I then left her, but I watched her go around the streets and followed her 2 or 3 times round. At about 9:20 p.m, I saw her and a man go through the gate into the yard where she was found. On the way to the station, he asked, am I going to be blamed for it? I wish I'd never known the blasted place. Later, his account changed again. He stated, I never saw Carrie after we left the Ring of Bells. I went looking for her until about 10:30. When reminded of his earlier statement, he claimed, "I never said that. What I said was that I saw a man and a woman going down that side of the street. I don't know where they went to, but the woman was not Carrie." Then came something more personal. "I do think a lot about her, and I would not have allowed her to go with any other man if it had been known. I thought too much about her for that. When we parted outside the Ring of Bells, I didn't want her to go, but she said she would go and get something for our night's lodgings. She went one way and I went the other. I was not so well pleased about it. I couldn't bear to see her with another man." Mr. Pierce called it what it was, a contradictory statement, and one that hinted clearly at motive. By early March, the evidence was no longer just circumstantial. Nicholson was brought in again, this time for close questioning. He repeated his story that Carrie had gone off on her own and that he hadn't seen her since. But the police had the autopsy results. They had the torn clothing, and with the reappearance of an old boyfriend onto the scene, they had a potential motive. The truth was about to get much harder to deny. Prisoner's kind treatment. In reply to the prisoner, the witness said that he treated the deceased very kindly, and the deceased had told witness that he used to give her everything he earned as a teaser in the mill. William Thomasterbox, licence holder of the Ring of Bells Inn in Northgate, said the prisoner and the deceased went to his house on Sunday 14th of February between 8:35 and 8:40 p.m. and stayed there until nearly 9 p.m, living together. The deceased asked the witness in prisoner's presence whether he knew that her Jack had come home. Witness knew that Jack had previously cohabitated with the deceased and had since enlisted. Witness replied, "That is awkward." The deceased laughed the matter off, and the prisoner said, "I think when this Jack comes home, he might have to go." Then prisoner added that he had seen Jack on the previous Friday, and they had got on very well and spent the evening together. The deceased said Jack was all right with us. Witness said the prisoner had treated the deceased very well. Prisoner again protested his innocence and said, "God is good. He'll look after me. I'm innocent." Sophie Archer, wife of James Archer, said that on Sunday night in question, she saw the deceased with the prisoner outside the Ring of Bells at about 9 p.m. They were standing talking. Witness went home, returning about 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour later. She saw that the pair had separated, but there was a dark man with the deceased against the Ring of Bells doorway. She didn't speak to the deceased on that occasion. In reply to the prisoner, witness said that the man with whom the deceased was talking had a Macintosh on his arm and he wore a soft hat. Dramatic outburst. Prisoner, weeping, stated, "That is my Carrie's murderer. I will give my hands off my body to find him. Will you know him again if you see him?" The witness stated, "Yes." Prisoner collapsed in his seat and said, "You will, thank God. I am as innocent as these men in here. Tell the police what sort of man he is." Witness said, "I have told them." The evidence was now passed to the borough magistrates. Nicholson's statement would be reread in full with a final attempt to unravel what happened that night. But questions remained. Was this story of one man's guilt or two men's silence? The prisoner was formally charged with the wilful murder of Carrie Jubb. The charge was read over to him, and in reply Nicholson said, "I reserve my defence." Detective Inspector Lee gave evidence that he had charged the prisoner and read him the statement, to which Nicholson replied as above. The usual legal caution had been observed. Mr. Pearce noted the inconsistencies in Nicholson's story, but acknowledged that Bamford's involvement couldn't be ruled out. 2 men had seen her last. 2 men had reason to lie, and 1 woman had ended up in a water tub. The contradictions were stark, but contradictions alone do not make a case, and suspicion, no matter how compelling, is not the same as proof. John William Bamford, who appeared in khaki, said he was a private soldier in the Duke of Wellington's regiment. He knew the deceased and had lived with her. He ceased to live with her in November last. At the time, he was locked up for deserting the army. He was away from Huddersfield until February the 3rd. When he returned from hospital, he did not see the deceased again. He first heard of Jubb's death on Monday, February the 15th, when he was in the Ship Inn. He had never seen the prisoner until that morning. Nicholson then accosted him, saying, "Are you Jack?" Witness replied that he was, and the prisoner then said, "I am the man who lives with Carrie." He did not hear of the woman's death until after that conversation. He came to Huddersfield from Halifax Barracks on February the 12th, and between that date and the 15th he was drinking. On the night of Sunday the 14th he left the Saracen's Head at about 20 minutes to 9, and then went to a friend's house as he slept on the sofa. Answering the prisoner, the witness said he did not remember whether the prisoner asked him if he had been with Carrie. That then concluded the case for the prosecution. Silence. The magistrates retired to consider the case. For all the bruises, the torn skirt, the witness accounts, and shifting stories, the question remained, was it enough? When they returned, the room held its breath. They had reached a decision. There would be no trial. The accused discharged. The magistrates then retired, and on returning to court, the chairman said they had carefully considered the case and had given great attention to it. They were of the opinion there was not sufficient evidence upon which they could commit the prisoner for trial, and he would be discharged. The prisoner stated, "Thank God." And that was it. No trial, no justice, no answers for Carrie Jubb, a woman discarded not only in death but in the eyes of the law. Her body was dragged from a horse tub. Her story never made it to court, and her killer, whoever he was, walked free. Further particulars. And now, dear listener, we turn from the brutal streets of Huddersfield to a different kind of horror. One not involving tubs, but textbooks. Brace yourself for a chilling tale of what can happen when a young woman dares to study astronomy and paint watercolours in the same lifetime. It's 1879. The science has spoken, apparently. Overstimulating a lady's brain could be fatal, especially if she's American. So gather your smelling salts and prepare to be warned lest you too meet a tragic end brought on by the dangerous habit of thinking. From the Illustrated Police News, the 27th of September 1879, a warning. A correspondent saw the following cutting from a New York paper as a warning to some of our English girls who act as if a woman's mental faculties are capable of the same strain as a man's. Gertrude Grimwood, the youngest of a family of 6 daughters, whose father and mother died at about the same time a year ago, died yesterday at number 128 East 45th Street, as physicians say, of inflammation of the brain brought on by overstudy. She was a student at Mount Holyoke Seminary for 3 years. Leaving that institution a year ago, she took up the study of natural philosophy, astronomy, and history, and qualified herself to pass an excellent examination for the position of teacher in one of the public schools. And May last, she was chosen from a number of candidates to fill a vacancy at the public school in 145th Street. Well, a conscientious teacher, she was at the same time a diligent student. Painting and watercolours was one of her amusements. Soon after the beginning of the summer vacation, she went to Lake George with one of her sisters, intending to spend the summer there. She took her books and her paints with her, and about 3 weeks ago she began to lose control over the muscles of her right hand, and at the same time her power of articulation was very much impaired. She was attended by physicians at Lake George, but apparently without any good effect, and on Wednesday last her eldest sister decided to bring her home. She reached the city on Wednesday evening and was treated by Dr. Frilith. Miss Greenwood became so violent that she had to be tied. She seemed to try to speak to those around her, but could do nothing but scream and throw herself from side to side on the bed. She died yesterday morning. She was 20 years old. That concludes this episode of News of the Times. If you enjoyed this dive into dark corners of history, do give us a like, subscribe and share. It lets the algorithm know we're a historical true crime channel, not a Victorian baths emporium with suspicious plumbing. For ad-free access to over 500 full-length documentaries spanning historical true crime, forgotten scandals, nostalgic pieces, sleepy time podcasts, and the occasional dry as dust attempt at British satire, hop over to our Patreon at patreon.com. News of the Times, Historical Crime. Your support keeps the lights on, the archives warm, and the narrators moderately caffeinated. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, still not legally classified as a plumbing hazard despite recent inquiries.